Let's give a warm round of applause for Tod Martin.
So the title of this talk this morning is So Far, a Midterm Report. And I want to tell you why it's called that. I turn 50 next month. And I'm hoping that my wife has a friend who keeps telling her that the universe takes things very literally when you say them. And I thought that maybe if I called it a midterm report, the universe would take that very seriously, and I'd get another 50 years, right? So in thinking about what to talk about, something came to mind, and that's an experience that happened back in March for me when I was at TED. Had a chance dinner with a guy from Google, and it's one of those things where you're having dinner with somebody, and they say something, and you're like, wow, that just like crystallized for me this important kind of valuable lesson in my life, right? And because that happened, it kind of made me think, I'm going to remember this, but I'm always going to remember it in this time, in this location, in this experience. And that got me thinking further because all of a sudden it dawned on me how many things that I hold as valuable lessons in my life come from these moments where I can remember very specifically the time, the location, the experience, right? So I decided that I would try to collect a few of those, and that's what I would share as my Creative Mornings talk. So there are 5 kind of quick stories that I want to tell you about that are kind of, I guess, the top 5 valuable lessons of my life so far. Another 50 years to go. And I'm going to get back around to the story about the guy at Google, but I want to start with my childhood. So let's go there first. Growing up for me, every Saturday morning from the time that I was probably 5 on meant my father waking me and my brothers up very early on Saturday morning to go out and work hard all day long. Which is fine, cool way to grow up. I learned a lot of stuff that way. But the thing that I started to notice probably about by the time that I was 7 or 8 years old is that everywhere we went with my dad, he would introduce us to anybody we encountered that he knew. So, you can imagine that experience. Don, meet my sons, Sky, Glenn, and Todd. Boys, meet Mr. Taylor, right? Now, where I grew up, it was Mr., Mrs., yes ma'am, no ma'am, absolute in that regard. But there was something about the way he introduced us that wasn't about that kind of, adult-child relationship. He was always introducing us as some kind of equal. And somehow I understood that even at 7 or 8 years old. Now, that kind of backfired on him when I was 9. We were invited to Jimmy Carter's gubernatorial inauguration in Atlanta. I grew up in Albany, Georgia. So we come up to Atlanta for the inauguration of the governor. We go to the reception at what was then the brand new governor's mansion on West Paces Ferry. We're standing in this long reception line to meet the governor, and I see him, probably 50 people up, and I take off, right? Hi, Governor! Right? So, humiliating, obnoxiously precocious, but that ability to think about people as being approachable and your equal has been one of the most generous gifts my dad could have ever given me. Because in my career, as in your careers, you'll get to work with some remarkable people. And I've gotten to approach people like, Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, as an equal. To work with Chuck Schwab as an equal, to work with Ralph Lauren and approach him as an equal, to meet people like, Sergey Brin and Jeff Bezos, and to have that ability to connect with them as an equal. So I guess kind of the first big life lesson for me is approach everyone as an equal. And it's, I guess, advice I want to try to pass off to you as well, because it's something that I think is a great gift my dad gave me. Now, the second story, completely different. I'm 25, 26 years old. It's a day trip to Tallahassee, right? You've been there, right? You get on the plane, you go, you come back all in a single day. In this case, the flight home that afternoon is on a little turboprop. And you've been there as well, right? They take you out through that door and you're on the tarmac and you're walking towards the plane and you realize how tight that cabin's going to be. And what do? You start looking to see who else is on the plane to figure out who you might be seated next to in that tight quarter. In this case, there was a really old man. And he was dressed in what had one point been maybe a tweed suit. At that point, was more like a seed suit. It was way past, right? Yeah. He's wearing a wool man's hat, the kind of houndstooth, typical man's dress hat. And glued right to the front of it was a cross made out of 2 popsicle sticks that had been painted and had some writing on them. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I'll tell you that going through my head was, please, not next to me, right? And you know where he sat. And thank goodness he did, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have this story to tell you. So, we're buckling in and getting ready to taxi out and talking to this guy. And I learned that he's in his 80s, that he's never been in an airplane in his life. And that he's on his way to Atlanta because that's where his daughter lives, and he's going to see his daughter and a grandchild that he's never seen before, right? So, beautiful story, right? It's an important thing about this day. It's one of those days where there's a really kind of thick cloud ceiling, right? You all know that it's like the world has a ceiling made out of clouds, and when you fly out on those kind of days, you take off, and usually you'll go up into those clouds, and you lose sight of everything, and sometimes you pop out on top of them. So think about that, right? And think about where I'm sitting. I have a guy next to me who has deep, deep religious faith, whose feet have never been off this planet. And what do you see when you come up out of that cloud deck? Now, he looks out the window and sees that, and his head jerks around to me. He didn't say a word, but the question on his face is absolutely clear. Are we still alive? Because you know where he thinks he is. Right? It was an amazing reminder of what a gift it is to see the world through other people's eyes. Right? What an incredible experience. So it reminded me that, there's something all of us can do every day, and that's to share the world as we see it, right? So I was actually just telling somebody this story. I'm a TEDster. I get to go to TED. 2009, probably the single greatest performance I've ever seen at TED. Eric Lewis playing the piano. He's a jazz pianist. Will bend your mind to see him play. I thought immediately while I was watching him, this is somebody that I could get to come to Unboundary, and people would have some sense of what I've experienced this year at TED, right? So I track him down. He's traveling with his manager. Before I leave TED, we've signed him to come and play for Unboundary. This is in March. He's going to come in June of 2009. 45 days later, an email comes from Chris Anderson, the organizer of TED, announcing a new idea called TEDx, independently organized events on a local level. And I'm like, hey, we got Eric Lewis coming. We'll just build a little TEDx Atlanta around Eric Lewis, and we'll push it out to September, and we'll find some speakers, right? So all of a sudden, I'm not only sharing Eric Lewis with everybody who works at Unboundary, but with 100 more people who come to the first TEDx Atlanta. And now that's gone on to be a group of about 300 people here physically, and about 10,000 people who watch the webcast online. So that ability to share what you see can somehow have pronounced impact on people, right? Which is what I would like to think TEDx Atlanta has done. Now, I'm going to admit, sometimes it can go horribly wrong trying to share what you see, because we used about a 50-foot expanse of wall once to build this brilliant diorama of our thinking for a client, right? We took them through it. We didn't see them for a year, right? Completely overwhelmed them, maybe confused them, baffled them, right? It was really, I thought, brilliant, right? But I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes maybe you need to be careful about how you share what you see, right? And we've gotten smarter now, and now we condense all that. We don't use 50 feet of wall space. We do these little things called brains food, and we curate and digest and pack a little content in. They're specific for each of our clients, and they're specific to whatever context is going on with them at any given time. I think there are a few out on the table out front, right? So the second lesson really is to share the world you see, right? So now the third story, again, completely different. Kind of early on in Unboundary, we had the great opportunity to work for a long time with IBM. And one of the guys at IBM that we worked with a lot was a guy named John Iwata, I-W-A-T-A, Iwata. John's now the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at IBM, but back then we would go to Armonk, New York, where IBM's headquarters are, and we'd be in these little conference rooms with a whiteboard on them, and John would draw these maps, and the maps were of current technology, kind of the near future of technology, and then kind of far out future of technology. Amazing, right? This ability to just kind of draw what the world is going into, right? And it really struck me as this incredible kind of gift he was able to give people, because he made sense out of things for everybody in the room. And, I'm not sure we even completely understood exactly how prescient he was in terms of his understanding of where the industry was going. But the thing that I took out of that, and that I guess influences Unboundary today, is we try to make maps of things ourselves, right? So behind me is kind of a quick sketch-up of a map we've been sharing with clients recently. The idea that, in that same kind of sense, the current world, an emerging future, the farther out future, they're existing conventions, right? They're the things that we've relied on for a long time that we use day after day after day. Out somewhere in the future are some new models. We see people using those to some extent. Some of that is driven by a world that once was one-way mass media and now is a network society. But you also see the symptoms of being stuck in those existing conventions, right? So a lot of mistrust around businesses, a lot of kind of declining relevance for brands, kind of sagging engagement among employees, higher and higher use of best practices, which is really kind of bolting on something that worked for somebody else to you, even if it doesn't fit, like wearing somebody else's clothes. And so we started trying to figure out, well, what's behind some of that, right? And if you think about it, many of the existing conventions we rely on come from models that somebody created, right? It happens that a lot of the models are pretty old, right? So the basic funnel theory of marketing, which most of us in our professions in some way rely on every day, attention, interest, desire, action, developed by a guy named St. Elmo Lewis in 1898, right? The name St. Elmo gives away that that's like past its time, right? Basic kind of working model of public relations, influence the influencer, developed by a guy named Edward Bernays in 1928. The very idea of segmentation and brand management, developed in 1931 by a rising star at Procter & Gamble named Neil McElroy, right? So the conventional models that we rely on have some kind of age on them. And so part of what we've gotten to do, working back with John Iwata from IBM and a group of about 19 other big corporations, we got tagged to help them go out and find a new model for communications. And that informs, some of what this is about. But the most important part of that map is kind of the middle ground, right? How do you get from those existing conventions out into a future where you're really relying on new models? Certain kind of a threshold to get across, right? A lot of rethinking and rethinking of how you're working. If you stretch it out too long, it gets pretty chaotic. If you figure out a way to really get through that threshold quickly, you can actually have a fairly invigorating conscious evolution in your company go on. We're going to get to a new way of working. And so that's given us a little model. It's part of what you see on our website, right? A threshold into purpose and meaning, relevance, resonance, out into truly being a significant company. Our particular model really isn't what's important. What's important is the lesson that I learned from John Iwata all those years ago when he was drawing maps. And that's that one of the things that we really have to do is to make sense of things for ourselves and for others, right? So that's the next lesson. Make sense of things for yourself and others. Okay, now, completely different place again, right? I'm young again. I'm 11, maybe 12. My dad is in all kinds of businesses when I'm growing up, and at this particular time, he was developing a hotel near Callaway Gardens down in Pine Mountain, Georgia. Had several things going on around Pine Mountain at that time. And so he took me and my brothers. I'm sure there was work involved. So he took me and my brothers there, and we met this man named Don Taylor. And for an 11-year-old kid, Don Taylor would be fascinating right off the bat because he had a speech impediment. He had a really strong lisp, right? And to an 11-year-old boy, that's fascinating, right? But there was something that, there's a reason that Don Taylor is in this talk this morning that has nothing to do with his lisp, I guess, maybe a little bit. But Don Taylor sat with me and my brothers for what felt like maybe 90 minutes. You know, my adult mind may have stretched out what was really 20 minutes into 90, but he told this amazing story to me and my brothers about growing up with a pet pig. Now, you can imagine a man with a lisp talking about how he had a pet pig, and the pet pig would meet him at the school bus every morning, and we were transformed, right? Like we were, right? Completely hooked, right? But I remember from Don Taylor that it was the first time I was really conscious about how powerful a story, and especially a really well-told story, could be, right? And in so much of the work that all of us get to do, that's really a role we play, right? We help write and tell many companies' stories. Unboundary talks about it as being companies' meta-narrative, right? The things that not only influence what they say, but ultimately also what they do. We've gotten to do that work with Coca-Cola. We've worked with Coke for probably 20 years, but probably no more important assignment than a few years back when Neville Isdale came in as CEO, and we helped with a thing called Manifesto for Growth. It was literally Coke regaining its confidence, resetting how it would define success, and setting up the kind of success and growth that it's experiencing today. Truly great work and a real opportunity to tell a great company's story in a completely new and different way. We've done that same kind of meta-narrative work with Coca-Cola, reframing their story in a concept called access, right? So lots of times when we think about network society, we think that that's the ability to send somebody an email or tweet something, but network society is actually bigger than that because you can get anything from anywhere in the world tomorrow. Think about that. The world is networked in a way where you can get anything from anywhere in the world tomorrow. And that's changed business models. It's changed how things are manufactured. It's changed distribution strategies. But there's a more important thing it's changed. Over the last 40 years, the lifespan of FedEx, more people have risen out of poverty than at any point in the history of mankind. Because the world's connected. The world's more connected than it's ever been. Cities are connected to cities, states are connected, nations are connected. Every household is connected to every household. And when people are connected, opportunities are present. There's also sometimes when you just have to push to the edge of a story. We've had the great fortune to work with Interface for about a dozen years, and one of the things that we love working on with them is their Green Build space every year. Green Build is the big convention of the U.S. Green Building Council, which Interface was actually involved in the founding of, right? So Green Build has become this crazy convention. There are like 2,000 exhibitors there, and there's every kind of crazy sustainability innovation you can imagine. You know, windmill street lamps and solar-powered parking lot sweepers and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so what we wanted to try to do with Interface is to take the really deeply held beliefs that Interface has about sustainability and their commitment to Mission Zero and put a really sharp edge on that messaging. So this is from a year or so ago. When you talk about sustainability for Interface, what that really means is getting off of oil. Never having to break another carbon molecule to make their product or to get it where it needs to be. And so we talked about oil as the elephant in the room. You know, amidst all these whirligigs and solar-powered things, to make sure that everybody was refocused on the bigger idea. We were able to show how Interface was making progress against that, but really it was an exhortation to everybody there. Let's remember, this is about getting off of oil. So the lesson from Don Taylor, stories have superhuman power. Superhuman power. Use it. Use it every single day. Okay, now I'm back around to what I was telling you about at the start, right? And that's this guy that I met from Google while I was at TED this year, back in March. His name is Benedict Gomes. He's a pretty big player at Google, reports directly to Larry Page, holds somewhere north of 70 patents for the software that crawls the internet looking for new pages. So he's a player, right? I'm in this kind of chance dinner conversation with him. And one of the things we start talking about is Google's ranking as the #1 best places to work according to Fortune magazine. And I'm actually kind of hitting him hard about it because I think Fortune magazine and best places to work does a real disservice to Google and to everybody who reads that stuff. When they focus on the idea that Google is a great place to work because there are washers and dryers and all these amenities. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Googleplex, but the washers and dryers and the amenities aren't what make it a great place to work. So I asked Benedict, I was like, you tell me, why is it a great place to work? And his answer came without hesitation. He goes, I meet with Larry at least once a week, usually more than that. And 4 out of 5 times when I meet with him, the response I get to what I'm trying to pitch to him is, you're not thinking big enough. How great is that? How great is to get that as a response, right? You're not thinking big enough. I love that. And to me, that is what would make it a great place to work. I was at Google before I met Benedict, and I used the little pano feature in my iPhone to take this picture. This is the lobby of one of the buildings on the Googleplex campus, right? That's Spaceship One, one of the X Prize spaceships, one of the competitors to that is docking today with the space station, right? I would say they're using the interior decorating budget to back up Larry's words and Benedict's story to me, right? I think they've hit it pretty hard. You're not thinking big enough. There you have it. Midterm report. So far, the 5 things that I've learned from crazy random places. Men in hats with popsicle sticks glued to the front of them and all kinds of other people. Approach everyone as an equal. Share the world you see. Make sense of things for yourself and for others. Stories have superhuman power. Use them. And make sure you're thinking big enough. Thanks so much. So 10 years out at Unboundary, I would say that we're probably definitely focused on that last lesson, right? Are we thinking big enough? So we have a well-developed practice in helping corporations through kind of massive transformation, big change. And so we're now growing practice areas in education and working with nonprofits and non-governmental organizations to try to take those skills that we've developed at using, we work well with companies that have 300,000 employees spread out globally, big complex systems, right? So we're trying to use those skills to move into new practice areas in other places that we think we can use our powers for good and help things move forward in the world. I guess in a certain sense, like the map I drew, helping other kinds of organizations move into new models and better ways of working as well. Yeah, so the question was, working with big companies, are we seeing anything that inspires us or that we feel good about in terms of social issues or how they're treating employees and those things, right? So I would say absolutely. I think it's one of the greatest times in the world to be the leader of a corporation, because I think corporations have a unique opportunity to finally stand up and be the leaders that we've imbued our belief in them that they are. They haven't always been everything we've given them credit for being, but so many of them have awakened to that possibility and to that opportunity. And so you see so many companies that now understand that their future success is based on sustainable success, that their ability to ever get to that kind of sustainable success is dependent on being an attractor of amazing talent. And so you have people that are changing, how they treat employees, how they think about employees, the space they give employees, right? So I'm actually incredibly optimistic about what I see going on in big companies because, at least for a lot of the ones that we work with, there's real awareness that they have an opportunity to stand and lead. There's a lot of, I think, hope that people express that their institutions, like corporations, will stand up and be the citizens we want them to be. There's a lot of mistrust in them as well, but I think they understand that balance, and they're trying to right that balance. Thanks so much, guys.
Let's give Tod a round of applause.